Hihani Washte. Good morning to all of you. I'd like to, first of all, thank the South Dakota Network Against Family Violence and Sexual Assault, in particular Tanya and Gail, for inviting me here today and inviting my team here today, and for this opportunity and honor of talking with all of you today. I am Sherriann Moore, or Sherry, and I am a tribal citizen of the Rosebud Sicangu Lakota tribe. And I serve as the tribe's Deputy Director of Tribal Affairs in the Department of Justice Office on Violence Against Women. I grew up, this is my homeland, I grew up in South Dakota, and I'm so happy and pleased to be home and to have this opportunity to talk with you and promote the programs and services and supports that we have to offer in the Office on Violence Against Women, and to work together with you as partners in the work to end violence against our tribal communities. I would also like to introduce two members of my Tribal Affairs Division team. We're all team, we still have that sports analogy. Tanya, we're a team in the Tribal Affairs Division, but who are here this week to provide very important information for you about OVW Tribal Affairs Division, or TAD as we're affectionately known, opportunities. Jen Marsh, who is the program manager of our tribal governments program and manages training and technical assistance activities, and also some of the special initiatives that we have in the Tribal Affairs Division. And Renee Stapp, who's the program manager of our Tribal Special Assistant to the U.S. Attorney program known as TSAUSA, also works as part of the Tribal Government's program team and manages a lot of our training and technical assistance as well. So Jen and Renee have a table in the back of the room. Unfortunately, our beautiful tabling skirts and props have not arrived yet, but we're here, and all of our information and details is in the heads of Jen and Renee. They are our subject matter experts. So please, even though there's nothing on our table, please go and pick their brains, ask them questions. Get information from them, make those connections and network. That's so important for you all to do also here while you're here over the next 2 days. I encourage you to connect and network not only with OVW, but with each other. You're here, you're convened with your colleagues who are doing this work together. Make connections, meet each other, talk about the work that you're doing. Oftentimes a lot of things cross over, there's best practices that you can learn from each other. Please take this great opportunity to do that. So in the role of Tribal Deputy Director, I work to advance OVW, the Office on Violence Against Women, the mission of preventing and addressing domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, and other forms of gender-based violence, including in our tribal affairs programs, sex trafficking. I'd like to take this opportunity this morning to provide you with just a brief overview and an update on the work of OVW Tribal Affairs. The Office on Violence Against Women was created to implement key parts of the Violence Against Women Act, known as VAWA. VAWA is legislation that came into existence after years and years of grassroots advocacy by many of you in this room, and the tireless efforts from survivors, including many of those in our tribal communities. Each reauthorization of the VAWA legislation, most recently in 2022, has enhanced VAWA protections and expanded grant programs to help tribal survivors access justice, safety, and healing. Importantly, these protections and programs and support services must be culturally appropriate. So important. You're going to hear more about that when Jen and Renee present later today. As you know, there are 574 federally recognized tribes across this nation, each with their own culture and traditions that must be the root of the response to ending domestic violence and sexual assault in tribal communities. So let me share with you some of the good work of our host for this event. You met Tanya. Well, many of you know Tanya. The South Dakota Network, and the culturally appropriate services that are being provided by the South Dakota Network through the Sexual Assault Forensic Medical and Advocacy Services for Tribes Initiative, as Tanya told you, is known as FASTER. FAST. FAST is a special initiative designed to increase the availability of sexual assault forensic examiners and trained sexual assault victim advocates in tribal communities. FAST was developed and funded in 2020 through a partnership between the Department of Justice Office on Violence Against Women and the Office for Victims of Crime. 6 sites were initially funded to do this work across the nation. Norton Sound Health Corporation, the Sitka Tribe of Alaska, the San Carlos Apache Healthcare, the University of Wisconsin, the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians, and our own South Dakota Network Against Family Violence and Sexual Assault, one of those 5 grantees. The grant made to the South Dakota Network supports full-time advocates who are solely dedicated to responding to sexual assault. The South Dakota Network keeps an on-call list that is provided to medical facilities, so there is response at all hours to a sexual assault call. The South Dakota Network partners here locally with the Oyate Health Center, which is a tribally owned primary health clinic based right here in Rapid City, just right up the road, that focuses on providing the highest standards of care for tribal citizens. This partnership has led to the development of a trauma center for sexual assault and will be the program that responds when a report is made. The South Dakota Network also assisted with the revitalization of the Sexual Assault Response Team, or SART, for the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. These are all vital components to being able to respond effectively to sexual assault. And this would not have happened without the support of the FAST funding through OVW and OVC, and importantly, would not have happened without the steadfast work of the South Dakota Network and their partner Oyate Health Center. Please join me in acknowledging the network for this work. Thank you, Tanya and Dale. It's fantastic. OVW administers numerous grant programs and funds training and technical assistance to tribes and tribal organizations across the country, such as all of you in this room who are working to prevent and respond to the VAWA crimes and support for victims and survivors. Increasing public safety in Indian country and Alaska Native villages is a top priority for OVW and the Department of Justice. Advancing tribal sovereignty, upholding the federal trust responsibility, and supporting tribal-driven community solutions are of great importance and are a core focus of OVW's tribal grant programs, services, and supports. For this fiscal year, 2024, I am pleased to announce that the appropriations for OVW to implement VAWA are $713 million, the highest amount that OVW has ever been appropriated by Congress for implementing VAWA. This represents an increase of over 35% since 2021. In FY23, last year, OVW's Tribal Affairs Division alone within OVW awarded nearly 64 million grants for tribes and tribal organizations. This year, based on the FY24 increase in appropriations, we anticipate to be able to award nearly $80 million through the Tribal Affairs Division for tribes and tribal organizations who are working to end violence in tribal communities and our urban Indian metropolitan areas. The Tribal Affairs Division administers 5 grant programs currently that are specifically designated for tribes and tribal organizations to respond to the evolving needs of tribal communities. In recent years, TAD has experienced tremendous growth. We heard from tribal leaders and tribal advocates that they needed more support from OVW staff in the field, boots on the ground, as we say. And as a result, we worked, since I came on board in 2017, we had 4 people. And now TAD has tripled, nearly tripled, more than tripled its staffing to have 14 staff members, such as Jen and Renee and others, many of whom are located across the country. In various states, from Alaska to the East Coast, located in tribal communities, and have extensive experience working with tribes, which Jen and Renee do have. You're going to hear me say Jen and Renee, Jen and Renee. Please see Jen and Renee. Throughout the next 2 days, you will hear from Jen and Renee, who will provide more details for you about the TAD grant programming and funding support. So I didn't want to go into the weeds of that with you. Now Jen and Renee will be presenting, and you'll hear more from them. Please meet them, ask them questions, so that you can have information and apply and become grantees. The disproportionate rates of violence against American Indian and Alaska Native women and girls, and the issue of missing or murdered Indigenous people are increasingly being recognized, and thanks in part to the work of many of you and many tribal advocates and tribal organizations. TAD's programs support the work that is being done in our tribal communities to end gender-based violence, support survivors, and hold offenders accountable. But this work cannot be done without your leadership and direction. Your knowledge and commitment are essential to preventing and addressing gender-based violence. Tribes and tribal communities know best. They know best more than anybody how to enhance the safety and justice and healing within their communities. OVW is committed to ensuring that tribal governments and tribal organizations have access to critical VAWA resources to advance these goals. OVW funds are critical to providing safety, support, and justice in tribal communities for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. We have diligently implemented initiatives to streamline the application and reporting processes and make our funding more accessible to tribes. We have taken a hard look at the application and grant management processes, and we recognize that we need to make the application process less burdensome and more simplified, while also providing tools and supports to applicants. We hear this from tribal leaders and advocates all the time. Reduce requirements, reduce special conditions, make it easy to apply for and get access to these funds. And we actively work to reduce these barriers and challenges to gaining access to the much needed resources, to get them where the funds where they're most needed in our tribal communities. We're very committed to supporting tribes that are interested in exercising special tribal criminal jurisdiction over non-Indian perpetrators. This includes the covered crimes of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, sex trafficking, stalking, child violence, assault of tribal justice personnel, and obstruction of justice. The expansion of these covered crimes was included in VAWA 2022. So we were very pleased with that progress, and we continue to work with tribes who are exercising their own tribal jurisdiction over these covered crimes. We provide them the financial support and the technical assistance for planning and implementing changes that are needed in their public justice and safety systems that are necessary for them to be able to exercise special tribal criminal jurisdiction. As a result of a listening session that was conducted by former Attorney General Eric Holder, the Tribal Special Assistant U.S. Attorney grant came about. Tribal SAUSA that I had mentioned earlier that Renee manages. And at that time, and still today, there was deep concern about the lack of attention that Indian country domestic violence and sexual assault cases receive at the federal level. Over the years, OVW has funded several tribes in 12 states to work with their partner, U.S. Attorney's Office, to hire a tribal prosecutor that is cross-designated as a special assistant U.S. attorney and works to prosecute cases in both tribal court and federal court. We've seen so much success and rise in interest in the Tribal SAUSA program. Congress has recognized it and is working to increase our appropriation for this so that we can expand the Tribal SAUSA program to more tribes, working more closely with their U.S. Attorney's Office. The Tribal SAUSAs work very closely within the Tribal Prosecutor's Office and the Federal U.S. Attorney's Office to fill gaps in jurisdictional coverage, increase communication, and consistent relationships between the federal prosecutors and the tribal community, and improve the quality of tribal cases that are being brought forward for prosecution. I would very much like to encourage South Dakota tribes to participate in our Tribal SAUSA program. And as I said, Renee's the manager and has the subject matter expert and has all the details on that program. OVW also launched this year a new initiative to fund healing and response teams, HRTs, which was created based on the recommendations that were made by the Not Invisible Act Commission, known as NIAC, that you're probably aware of over the last few years, has gone across the country, held several listening sessions, heard directly from tribal leaders and survivors, and helped to inform the report that was published called the Not One More report. Out of that, one of the findings and recommendations was to create HRTs, healing and response teams. The funding that we are putting forward, and we're working on this now actively, will support the creation, training, and sustainability of healing and response teams using a tribal-based model of care to respond to missing or murdered Indigenous persons cases that are related directly to the VAWA crimes: domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, and sex trafficking. As part of this work, the grantees will get together, complete a process analysis and assessment. They will draft a report outlining the results of a nationwide effort to identify what HRT models exist, and they'll develop guidelines and protocols and toolkits, and then in year 3 of this work activity, OVW will begin hosting in-person healing and response teams implementation workshops. For those of you, and we've asked for more funding for this so we can expand the funding to interested organizations who may be interested in implementing a healing and response team in your tribal community or in an urban Indian metropolitan service area. I would also like to emphasize that the funding opportunities I mentioned and other funding opportunities that you will hear about from Jen and Renee are specifically for tribes and tribal organizations, but importantly, all of OVW's programming, the Tribal Affairs Division and the Grant Development Management Division, are also open to tribes. An example of that is the campus program, which has a special initiative to support the work and the sexual assault on our that is may be occurring on our tribal colleges and the campuses of our tribal colleges and universities. So I encourage you to explore the possibility of applying for any and all OVW funding, not just TAD. through the different grant programs. And as I said, you can learn more from Jen and Renee, or our website, through our website, which is justice.gov/OVW. In addition to funding increased efforts to prevent and address gender-based violence, we know that research and data are also very important to inform these efforts and the work that we do. The Department of Justice, OVW partners with the Department of Justice NIJ, the National Institute of Justice program of research, which examines violence against American Indians, Alaska Natives, and evaluates the effectiveness of federal, state, tribal, and local responses to violent crime. In the last month, OVW renewed the charter for the Task Force on Research on Violence Against American Indian, Alaska